So what does this all mean? So your child has just received a diagnosis of either autism or Asperger's syndrome. For your child to receive this diagnosis, it means they will have difficulty in 3 to 4 areas, which are as follows: communication, social interaction, rigidity of thought, and sensory issues. The reason I have depicted these as interlocking circles is to show you how we as neurotypicals, and that's our label, change all the time. One way of looking at ourselves is to say that we are many different people to many different people. Take communication as an example. How many of us have a telephone voice? One minute we are talking to the family in our regional dialect, then as soon as the phone goes, we suddenly turn into someone who is quite posh. Then no sooner have we done this and we realise it's someone that we know, then we suddenly change back to our regional dialect. We also talk to different people differently. For instance, you talk to young babies in a way that is described as motherese, such as using over-the-top facial expressions and dramatically changing your voice. Now imagine if we use the same way of communicating with our manager at work. That interaction probably wouldn't end well. The same can be said for the way we interact socially. Basically, we are many different people to many different people. If I were to meet you on the street, I would show you a version of myself that I would think that you would want to see. We show just enough of ourselves to people that we hope they like us, and we hide all the things that they may not like about us. We magically seem to just shape-shift from different personality to different personality, dependent on the social situation. I believe that it is our flexibility of thought that helps us achieve this. With someone who has autism, you tend to get one version of themselves, and regardless of the situation, they can only be their one true self. So if they don't like you, they may tell you directly. If we work with people that are not very good at their job, we would just bitch about them behind their back, whereas someone on the spectrum may tell them that they're useless to their face. Us neurotypicals also may have some degree of sensory issues, but this is nowhere as intense as individuals that are on the spectrum. At this point, I should also mention that the diagnostic model, DSM-5, has just been updated and has now merged social interaction and social communication. So the new model breakdown is that individuals will have a difficulty with social communication, rigidity of thought, and sensory issues. However, in the UK at the moment, you may still come across the old model, as the World Health Organisation's model, the ICD-10, has not been updated yet, although it probably will follow suit with the DSM-5. I should also point out that the DSM-5, the term Asperger's syndrome is not being used. Instead, everyone on the spectrum is identified as having ASD. The following diagram identifies 3 individuals that have a diagnosis of either Asperger's syndrome, high-functioning autism, or classic autism. You can clearly see that although they have different names associated with their diagnosis, they do indeed have very similar traits, although how these traits impact on the individual will be very different. The scale on the left-hand side of the graph represents a normality scale, 5 meaning the individual would be classed as having no issues, and 0 meaning the individual has great difficulty in this area. Dan has a diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome. Dan is 28, and during his childhood he was never seen as a problem child. In fact, the only word that was used to describe Dan on occasion was quirky. His childminder reported that when she would take him for a walk, he would stop at an empty driveway and ask, "Where's the car?" The childminder would reply, "I don't know, Dan." He would then ask, "Has the man gone to work?" The childminder would reply, "I don't know, Dan." He would then ask, "When will the man be back?" To which the childminder would reply, "I don't know, Dan." They would then proceed down the road until they came to another empty driveway, and the whole routine would proceed again. Very quickly, walks were directed to the local park. Dan would also line his toys up rather than play make-believe with them. An example of this would be he would line his dinosaurs up in order of weight or height. The only difficulty he recounts at primary school was when he was playing snap with a group of friends and he was losing. He desperately wanted to end the game but did not know how to. He decided to take each individual card and rip it up into 6 individual pieces. This had the desired effect of ending the game, but it also ended his friendships with the other children. Secondary school was more problematic for Dan. Although he was a bright student, he had great difficulty making friends and had great difficulty understanding how to apply the rules of school. Dan eventually had a nervous breakdown at the age of 16, and it was only when he received this that he got his diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome. In terms of communication difficulties, it is extremely difficult to see where Dan has a problem with this. But if you know him well enough, you would see that Dan's main problem is receptive communication. In terms of social skills over the years, Dan has made many social mistakes, but at the age of 28, he's learned how to fit into our neurotypical world, although he admits that he really doesn't understand the reasoning behind the reasons why we do the things we do. He also limits the amount of time he has social contact with people, because although he can do it, he finds it very stressful. Dan also struggles to identify with his peer group, and most of his friends are a lot older. Dan at times can be very rigid in his thinking and has a few special interests that he likes to engage in. We will take a look at special interests later on in another chapter. In terms of sensory issues, he says that he has none. Tom's diagnosis is high-functioning autism. Tom is currently 44. As a child, it was thought that Tom had severe learning difficulties. Growing up, he went to special schools and was always seen by his family and peers as being a bit of a problem child. If he went out to play, he would always let his younger brother take the lead in negotiations when it came to interactions with other children. His dad left at an early age, so he and his mother went to live with Tom's grandparents. By the age of 18, though, they'd had enough of Tom and he had to move out. His communication skills appear quite good, although like Dan, it's his receptive language that he has difficulty with. Socially, Dan struggles, unless you know him really well. He gets arrested on a regular basis, gets into lots of arguments with the general public, mainly because he likes to correct them when they've broken the law, and on occasion he's ended up in hospital when a few altercations have gotten out of hand. Tom has major sensory issues, such as not eating the same food as other people who are with him, or if you accidentally touch him on the street, he likes to touch you back, which of course most people will not let him do. He also dislikes it if people have their legs crossed, and he will often tell people to put their feet on the floor. Anthony has a diagnosis of classic autism. Anthony is 40 years old and lives in a residential setting. He has limited vocabulary, so has difficulty expressing himself, and he also has difficulty with receptive language. Anthony has quite poor social skills, such as thinking nothing about walking round his residential unit with nothing on but a vest. Anthony's main focus is asking repetitive questions numerous times every hour. The amount of questioning increases every Friday when Anthony expects to be taken home. Recently, this has posed a bit of a problem because Anthony used to go home every week, now only go home once a month due to Mum's ill health. Anthony can't comprehend this change and will often wait by the back gate on a Friday insisting that he is going home. Then, as if by magic, at 4 o'clock, he will say, "Mommy, next week," and carry on as if nothing had happened. Anthony displays lots of challenging behaviour and will often pull hair or dig his nails into people. He also appears to like to be restrained. So we have 3 individuals who have a diagnosis of autism or Asperger's syndrome, and yet their condition impacts on them very differently. Throughout this series of videos, I will try to unravel some of the reasoning behind some of these differences. It should also be pointed out that all these individuals experience high levels of anxiety, and we'll take a look at this later on.